1. You ready to go?
We're going, man.
We're going. Okay. Y'all ready to begin? Thank you, Lee. This session is called to order. Thank you very much, Lee. I appreciate that. So, good morning once again. Welcome. Thank you for coming. Today is the second installment of 5. Today we'll be talking about Buddhism. I hope that you all remembered to come here rather than there, even though there is a sign there. However, starting next week, we will be over there. Okay, so we'll be back in our own home. Are there any final questions or comments about Hinduism before we jump into the Buddha? All right. Does anybody remember anything about Hinduism? Probably you do. All right. So let's just. I'm going to approach this the same as I did last week, and that is to talk about where it came from, and then its evolution over time. So we have the advantage with Buddhism of actually having a person to whom we can attribute the origin of Buddhism. We can't say that about Hinduism, but we can say that about Buddhism. Siddhartha Gautama is the guy that we're talking about, and I'll get to him in just a minute. But a couple of introductory comments about Buddhism. The first is that, like Hinduism, Buddhism is a catch-all phrase for many, many different ways of practicing religion. As a matter of fact, Buddhism grew out of Hinduism. It comes out of the culture of Hinduism. The Buddha, Siddhartha, was from India. I think we might think originally, our first thought might be, our instinct might be to say, well, he was Chinese. No, he was not. Okay, he was from the northeastern part of India. So India has given birth to two of the largest religious movements in history, Buddhism and Hinduism. So, if we're talking about the founding or founder or founding event of Buddhism, it is Siddhartha Gautama himself. As a matter of fact, he rejected Hinduism. And he also rejected, which I'll talk about in a minute, another religious tradition that was in India at the time called Jainism. On a wintry January day, you will soon know why you would not want to be a Jainist. At least a true believer of Jainism. You would be cold today. Okay, so, second, what Buddhism has in common with Hinduism is that it is a process of liberation from the suffering of this world. The experiential starting point for both Hinduism and Buddhism is the experience of suffering in the world. But Hinduism and Buddhism believe that the root cause of our suffering is different. So Hinduism, as we saw last week, believes that the error that humans make, the mistake that we make, is in the way that we think. We think that that there is a world inside ourselves and a world outside of ourselves, right? Brahman and Atman. But then the solution to that is that Brahman and Atman are one, that the world within the self and the world outside the self are in actuality one and the same. Buddhism will say that the fundamental error that human beings commit is not in the way that we think, it's in the way that we feel. And I'll get into this in some depth. The fundamental error that we commit in terms of our feelings is that we desire. We desire the wrong things. We crave the wrong things. We even crave liberation. We crave salvation. And as long as we desire it, we can't have it. Yeah. Yes. There was a look that was like, what? Yeah, I understand that look completely. If we desire salvation, if we desire the Buddha, we will not achieve salvation or liberation. More to come. The Buddha rejected two extremes. He experienced them and then rejected them. So on the one hand, there was Hindu meditation, Brahmanist meditation, if you will. That meditation that would lead one to the idea, the enlightenment, that Brahman and Atman are one, that all is one, and I am that so-called drop in the ocean, but that everything is the ocean. The Buddha rejected that. The Buddha also rejected the practice of Jainist asceticism. Asceticism simply means self-denial. So during Lent, we practice asceticism when we fast. We practice asceticism when we deny ourselves, when we don't eat meat on Fridays. It's not much of a denial if we're having lobster or crab, but still, it is a kind of self-denial. The thing about the Jainist true believers is that they denied themselves almost all food. And the reason why I said you wouldn't want to be a Jainist on a day like today is because they even deny themselves clothing. You will see in India Jainists who are, who would be arrested in this country for indecent exposure. Okay, not a whole lot of them, but that's the belief of Jainism, that if we deny ourselves food, clothing, shelter, all those kinds of things, then we can achieve moksha, we can achieve liberation or salvation. The Buddha rejected that as well. And that is why Buddhism is referred to as the middle path. It is the middle path between the extremes of Jainist asceticism, self-denial, and Brahmanist or Hindu meditation. Fair enough? More to come on that as well. Let's talk about the Buddha. His name, I think it's in there, is Siddhartha Gautama. He lived somewhere in the 6th to the 5th centuries before Christ. He was born in northeastern India. He was born to one of the higher castes, the Kshatriya caste, the political leadership caste, if you will. He was married as a young man, probably by the age of 20, but in those days that was not young. He married one of his cousins, who the story has it was either 16 or 19. The details are a little bit fuzzy. She was a very good wife, but the story has it that within himself, inside himself, Siddhartha was troubled. In particular, he was troubled about his own liberation, his own salvation. Where is all of this going? So he has a child, and then sometime during his 20s, he decides to leave home. So back in those days, the Indian government did not garnish his wages as they would have done now, because he was a deadbeat dad. But anyway, he leaves home and he becomes a wanderer, a mendicant. So that begs the question, why would he have done such a thing? But in those days, at that time, it was considered perfectly acceptable for the man, not the woman, but the man to go off on his own to find himself, to discover his true identity, to discover his liberation, whatever. Okay, so Siddhartha does that. And so the story is told, it's probably more, well, let me use the same phrase that I use about the Bible. It's probably not very factual, but it's all true. Okay? Not factual, but true. So the story has it, and the story is called the story of the 4 passing sights. Siddhartha's father, prior to Siddhartha's birth, was warned by some soothsayers or seers or whatever that someday his son might become a homeless, wandering monk. But that if he did not become a wandering monk, that he would someday become the emperor of all of India. So Dad, wanting what he felt was the best for his son, protects him, shelters little Siddhartha from seeing illness, suffering, old age, and death. Okay? So that he wouldn't feel the need to turn to religion. Everything would be happy, happy. No illness, no suffering, no old age, no death. Sounds pretty good. However, the gods, the deities in the heavens saw this, and they decided to intervene. So here is a little bit of a selection from the story of the 4 passing sights. The gods, looking down from the heavens, and knowing that they must take a hand in the affair, sent one of their number down to earth to assume the shapes that should awaken the young prince to his true destiny. One day, as the prince rode in his chariot, a god appeared in the form of a decrepit old man. The prince asked his charioteer what he was seeing. The charioteer answered, "An old man." "And who gets old?" Siddhartha said. "Everyone." On another day, the prince saw the second apparition, that of a loathsomely diseased man, and knew for the first time how physical illness and misery may attend mortals all the days of their lives. The third sight was that of a dead man being carried along to a funeral pyre, and the prince came to know of the dreadful fact of death. These 3 awful sights robbed him of all peace of mind. And in parentheses, it is a fact, and perhaps the legend is based upon it, that in one of the oldest passages in the Buddhist writings, he is reported as saying, "I also am subject to decay, and am not free from the power of old age, sickness, and death. Is it right that I should feel horror, repulsion, and disgust when I see another in such plight? And when I reflected thus, my disciples, all the joy of life which there is in life died within me." Alarmed at the depression of spirit under which the prince labored, his father sought to cheer him with elaborate entertainment, but without success. The prince remained distraught until he beheld the 4th sight, that of a calm ascetic in a yellow robe, walking toward him as he sat under a tree by the roadside. From this person who had gained true peace of soul, he learned how freedom from the miseries of old age, disease, and death may be won. Then, it is said, the prince made the resolve to go out from the household life into the homeless state. So it was the experience of suffering, disease, old age, and death that drove Siddhartha into his search for salvation or liberation. So Siddhartha, so the story has it, now begins a 6-year intensive search for liberation. So he tries Brahmanism, he tries meditation, and he was the best meditator? I don't know if that's a word. That he meditated so hard for a year and nothing. No liberation, no salvation. Didn't happen. Then he tries Jainist asceticism for 5 years, to the point where he almost kills himself. And he still fails to find enlightenment. This is how it's described. The author of this book, Noss, says, undoubtedly ample allowance must be made for historical exaggeration. But it is said Gautama now sat with set teeth and tongue pressed against his palate, seeking by sheer force of mind to restrain, coerce, and dominate his heart until the sweat streamed from his armpits. He practiced restraint of breath until he heard a roaring in his head and felt as if a sword were boring into his skull. Violent pain almost drove him senseless, and still no insight came. He lived for periods on all sorts of nauseous foods, dressed in chafing and irritating garments, stood for days in one posture, or, having squatted, moved around while he was squatting. He sat on a couch of thorns, lay in a cemetery on charred bones among rotting bodies. Now this is asceticism. Let dirt and filth accumulate on his body till it dropped off of itself, and even ate his own excrement in the extremity of self-discipline. Makes you not want to be a Buddhist. Right? No, this is not the end of the story. He reduced his diet to only 1 hemp grain, or a single grain of rice, or 1 jujube fruit a day. He became excessively thin. Yes.
The original diet.
Yeah, really. The Majjhima Nikaya credits him with the following vivid words of self-description. When I was living on a single fruit a day, my body grew emaciated in the extreme. My limbs became like the knotted joints of withered creepers. Like a buffalo's hoof were my shrunken buttocks. Like the twists in a rope were my spinal vertebrae. Like the rafters of a tumble-down roof were my gaunt ribs. Like the starry gleams on water deep down in the depths of a well, so shone my gleaming eyes deep down in the depths of their sockets. And as the rind of a cut gourd shrinks and shrivels in the heat, so shrank and shriveled the scalp of my head. If I sought to feel my belly, it was my backbone which I found in my grasp. Now that's asceticism. Right. That's asceticism. So he finally, before he dies, he rejects that approach. He rejects Jainist asceticism. And so he continues to wander, wondering what's going to be next. And finally, exhausted, I wonder why. He sits at the foot of a tree, and a young girl gives him a bowl of rice mixed with milk. And he eats the bowl of rice. And the 5 guys who are wandering with him thinks he has jumped ship. He has abandoned his mission. Right? How dare you eat a bowl of rice? But when he eats the bowl of rice, he recovers his strength. So now he goes to this place called Bodh Gaya. And once again, he sits under a tree. And this time he says, all right, this is it. I am going to sit calmly under this tree. I am either going to find salvation or liberation, or I will die. This is it. Last chance, whatever happens, happens. And so he sits. And he sits. And finally, it dawns on him what he had been doing that was causing him to not experience liberation. It was because he had desired it so much. He had tried to force it. He had tried to make it happen. And that just didn't work. So he said the cause of our suffering, the cause of our not being saved is desire. Tanha, T-A-N-H-A. He said if he could cease desiring, if he would cease this false desire, then he would experience salvation, liberation, and he would become a liberated one, a blessed one, a Bodhi, B-O-D-H-I, which is pretty much the same thing as a Buddha. That's what a Bodhi or a Buddha is, a liberated one. So now, having experienced this insight that the problem was the problem was desire, and that the fundamental problem of life is that we desire things that we cannot have. He experiences this, the same word is used in both Hinduism and Buddhism. He experiences moksha. He experiences bliss, mindfulness, full awareness. He becomes fully conscious of himself and the world. He experiences an earthly taste, a foretaste of nirvana. He escapes from the cycle of death and rebirth. Yes, Buddhism believes in samsara, or the cycle of death and rebirth, reincarnation. And he becomes the enlightened one. He becomes the Buddha. Once again, I'm not going to read all day, but I'm going to read one more thing for now. From this moment onward, Prince Siddhartha merits the title Buddha, an awakened one or an enlightened one. Whatever the process of his thought, he was now without desire. He felt no sensual yearnings, was purged of wrong states of mind. The Buddhist books say he then passed into a state of awareness or wakefulness, suffused by an ecstasy, having four phases of ecstasy, and culminating in the state that, knowing neither satisfaction nor dissatisfaction, is the consummate purity of poised equanimity and mindfulness. It seemed to him, quote, ignorance was destroyed, knowledge had arisen, darkness was destroyed, light had arisen, as he sat there earnest, strenuous, resolute. Also, he was convinced that, quote, rebirth is no more. I have lived the highest life. My task is done. And now for me, there is no more of what I have been. He thus experienced the earthly foretaste of nirvana. Yeah, Donna.
So Buddha is like a state of mind?
A Buddha, yeah, being a Buddha is both a person and the state of mind of that person. You are enlightened.
So more than one person can be Buddha?
Yes. There have been many Buddhas. And even Siddhartha Gautama himself said he was not the only or the first Buddha. Okay? Anyone who experiences enlightenment is a Bodhi, is an enlightened one. Okay? Lee, you're a Bodhi, right?
Of course.
Yeah.
I'm enlightened like you wouldn't believe. But what I'm trying to get the picture here is he's got the skin and bones. You know, he can feel his backbone and all this other thing. And yet the picture of Buddha, in my mind, from everything else,
perfect.
Is a guy as big as this table.
Yeah.
And he's fat, bumbling, he got big jaws.
Yes.
And they're lighting candles to him for what? To become enlightened?
Yeah, well, you know, they're lighting candles to the Buddha probably the way candles Catholics light candles, just as a form of veneration. But you raise a very good point. Why is the Buddha fat and smiling? There are some who think that that's, you know, what's that got to do with salvation? Well, he's fat because he has rejected the asceticism of Jainism. Now, he still believed in restraint in eating, okay?
Didn't look like it.
I know it doesn't look like it, yeah. Too many carbs. But, and he's smiling because he has found enlightenment. So the Buddha smiles and he's chubby. He's a chubby guy. And that's why, because it's because of his rejection of that extreme asceticism of the Jainists.
If I was a Buddha and I went to the symbol, okay, and I asked for enlightenment, what am I asking to be enlightened about?
Well, you're asking to relinquish all false desires. And I'll get into that.
Okay.
I'll get into that experience. That's what you're looking for. Yeah.
A quick aside. If you travel from Northeast India through Myanmar, Vietnam, Thailand, and into China,
Yeah.
you're going to find different versions of that same Buddha. And the earliest ones, the young-looking one, you will find in Northeast India,
Yeah.
and Myanmar.
Yeah.
The one he is describing is the one you find.
As you traverse through different countries, the Buddha puts on weight.
Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
he ages.
He ages.
And he ages. Okay.
Yes, he looks like a young man.
Yeah.
In his early
In northeastern
30s.
India. Interesting. Interesting. Well, that's when he experienced moksha. Yes, thank you for that. Okay. So now he is enlightened. And the story has it that at this moment he faces a question. Do I just sit here and enjoy nirvana? Or do I teach what I have learned to others? And if I teach it to others, will they then be attracted to the false desire for liberation rather than true liberation? So he has to ponder that. And eventually he decides that he will teach. And so the first people that he teaches are those 5 wanderers, the guys who had been with him and then left him. He finds them again, he converts them, and they become the Sangha. They become the order of monks that are his closest disciples. Then he continues to teach in northeastern India. That's where he stays. And the number of his followers continues to grow. So the monks, so here's the way of life. Here's the way of life of the earliest Buddhists. They are to follow the 10 precepts. The monks have to follow all 10. Lay people only have to follow the first 5. So, number 1, refrain from destroying life. That's kind of relevant today, isn't it? Refrain from destroying life. This is the principle known as ahimsa, which is practiced in the extreme by Jainists. So the Buddha got it from Jainism and kept it, but not in the same extreme. So, again, to go back to Jainists, you will frequently see them with like a little whisk broom, okay? And if they see a spider or an ant or something in their way, rather than kill it, they will whisk it out of the way. You won't see them with a fly swatter, okay? Well, a true Jainist. There are many different ways to be a Jainist too.
But they got clothes on.
Most of them do.
I thought
Thank God.
I thought that was against Jameson's.
Well, yeah, but there's, like everything else, there's a lot of different ways to practice Jainism.
So it's a variety.
So, quick aside, the Jainists in India, who are supposed to be ascetics, are among the wealthiest people in India because they don't spend their money, they just accumulate it. Okay, so anyway, number 2, do not take what is not given. In other words, beg for your food. 3, abstain from unchastity. 4, do not lie or deceive. 5, abstain from intoxicants. 6, eat moderately and not after noon. 7, do not look on at dancing, singing, or dramatic spectacles. Sounds kind of Baptist, doesn't it? Number 8, do not affect the use of garlands, scents, unguents, or ornaments. Very simple appearance. Number 9, do not use high or broad beds. Number 10, do not accept gold or silver. Okay? So those are the 10 precepts. Yeah, Tom?
What do they eat if the first one said do not take?
Do not beg for your food. So, if someone gives you meat, take it. If someone gives you rice, if someone gives you fish, okay? Now, remember, we're still in the very, very beginnings of this, and there's an evolution to this. And we'll see that Buddhism, like every religion, changes a lot from the beginning to where it ends up. I'm happy to say that the Buddha also founded an order of nuns because he believed both men and women could experience liberation. Unlike the Hindus, right? Where you had to be a Brahmanist male to experience true enlightenment and move on to nirvana. Not so with the Buddha. So the Buddha continues teaching for years and years and years, and he finally dies around the year 483 BCE. Okay? So now there's his life, and we've already looked at his teachings a little bit, but let's dig into it a little more deeply. So, thing number 1. The Buddha rejected all 3 of the ways of salvation of Hinduism. Remember last week we said there were 3. The way of works, the way of devotion, the way of knowledge. Okay? The Buddha rejects all 3 of those. He, in particular, remember the way of devotion is to a particular god or goddess, right? The 330 million different gods. The Buddha, strictly speaking, was an atheist. Okay? There is no need for a transcendent, eternal being for the Buddha. He said that the universe was filled with gods and goddesses and deities of all kinds, but that none of them was eternal. All of them come into being, and pass out of being. Okay? There is not anything that exists forever.
So there's no beginning.
No, you're right. For both Hinduism and Buddhism, the universe
Was not created.
is eternal. It just is. Okay?
Doesn't that debunk your earlier thing that the gods looked down and they sent somebody down to put an old man?
Yeah. No, yes, and not really, Lee, because those gods existed at that time,
Oh, they went.
but they're not eternal.
I see.
He will say that everything on earth and in the heavens comes into existence and then passes out of existence. We Westerners would say there has to be a necessary being. There has to be something that started everything else. Otherwise, nothing would be here. Buddhists and Hindus don't have a problem with that. Okay? The universe simply is. We are followers of the Aristotle's principle of non-contradiction. A thing cannot both be and not be at the same time. Buddhists and Hindus say, why not? A thing can both be and not be at the same time.
To be or not.
To be and not to be, right? Yeah. So, okay,
They don't believe in any kind of afterlife. It's just reincarnation again, or
I
do
thought you
they?
said they did.
hang on. All right, yeah. Good, all good questions. Love the questions that's coming. Well, I don't want to tip it off. I still have almost an hour, so I don't want to jump to the end of the book. So okay, so any kinds of prayers or devotions to your favorite deity or to God or whatever, it's worthless. It's a waste of time. So what does that say in essence? It says that salvation is accomplished by ourselves. The Buddhism of the Buddha, the classical Buddhism, is a system of self-salvation. There is no savior. There is no Messiah. There is no someone who comes to save us. We save ourselves. Okay?
By enlightenment.
By enlightenment, exactly. And I've already said, and this is the second one of his teachings that I want to talk about, that the fundamental error that we commit as human beings is an error in the way that we feel. We desire things that we cannot have. And so we suffer. We want health forever. We can't have it. We want to be young forever. We can't have it. We don't really want to experience death, but we do. Okay? There are all kinds of cravings and desires that we want that cause us to suffer and keep us from experiencing the bliss and the peace that we can have. Okay. So, I've already mentioned this, but he modified the law of karma from Hinduism. So, any person of any caste or either gender can free herself or himself from desire and experience liberation. Okay? Much more egalitarian. Well, not much more. It is egalitarian. Brahmanist Hinduism was not. Now, the doctrine of reincarnation. Okay? And this is, okay, so this is where, all right, I'll go slowly. He said that rebirth takes place without an individual soul passing from one existence to the next. So, what he means by that is that even though I appear to be an individual, right? An individual self, I appear that way to you, and I appear that way to myself. I am not. What I am, and this is according to the Buddha, what I am is a particular configuration of 5 elements: body, perception, feelings, habits of thought, and reasoning. Those 5 elements, which he called skandhas, those 5 elements in their particular configuration right now, that's I. That is I. So when I die, this is what happens. Those 5 skandhas, those 5 elements of personhood, they split apart. And then they reassemble. And then that is what the next reincarnation is. But I can't call that next reincarnation I. I can't call it me. Because it's a different configuration. See, it's kind of different, isn't it? So these 5 elements, I'll say them again. Body, perception, that's sense perception. Feelings, thought, and reasoning. Those 5 elements, the way they're configured right now, are you and you and you and you and you. Do you have all 5? Yeah, you do. You have all 5.
I've been in like
I pick on Lee often. So those 5 elements, the way they're configured right now, that's what makes you, and me. But when we die, those 5 elements are broken apart and then reconfigured.
Who did that?
It just happens.
Oh, it just happened.
It just happens.
Okay.
Yeah. There's no God directing all this. We got to get that out of our heads. There is no divine, transcendent being that's directing all of this. It just happens. Okay. And so, a person is neither the same nor different from one life to the next.
So it's like water. You can be ice, you can be liquid, you can be steam.
That analogy is okay, but there's still, the thing is, Allison, from one to the next, you're still water. It's not like the water changes to ice. I prefer to say it as, I think of 5 soda straws. Okay, so my 5 soda straws are configured in a certain way right now. But then when I die, it all breaks apart and comes back together, but in a different configuration. And that's what will be the next thing that I am this time. So in the next life, in the next reincarnation, it's the same 5 elements, which is the same as what I have, but they're not me. So I am both, I will be me and not be me in the next life.
You're mixed up.
Yeah, I am both, I am and I am not in the next life.
So those 5 elements are always the same for me, even though reconfigured, so I don't get any of yours, I only keep mine.
No, you can't have mine,
Okay.
but I can't have yours either.
Okay.
You got to own your own. You got to own your own skandhas. That's the way it works. Okay.
Mark, you have to confuse by a couple things. You've referred a few times now to the Buddha,
Yeah.
but I think you said there could be more than.
Yeah.
So when you say the Buddha, are you, in a sense, are you saying like the Pope? So
No.
So
No.
there's not one.
Yeah. He is. I refer to him as the Buddha because he is the one who is recognized as. I say founder. He would never have called himself that. He would have said, "I am the next Buddha. I am the next enlightened one in history." So, in a sense, you're right to call him the Buddha is a little bit of a misnomer.
Okay. But there can be more than one.
There are, according to them, there are more than one.
So back then, at this time that you're talking about, were there changes sometimes? I mean, so this spiritual leaders, they could say, well, we've been looking at that wrong. This is what we really meant. And it's always going to be these things that, I can't say his name, but
Siddhartha.
original, yeah.
Yeah. Once again, we'll see that the original insight of the Buddha will be changed. Okay? And so while the teaching about the skandhas, I think, remains, we'll see that what the Buddha's fundamental insight changed quite a bit. Keep in mind this, and this is the biggest change. For Siddhartha, for that Buddha, salvation is accomplished by ourselves. Later Buddhism will say, no, that's not the case. So hang on to that thought. But
So that was an evolution.
that's an evolution. As in any religion, that's an evolution. So what is the world? The world, and this is key, I think, to understanding Buddhism. What is the world? The world is nothing but a ceaseless kind of flow, if you will, of things coming into existence and then passing out of existence. And that's a key insight for Buddhism. Nothing is permanent. Nothing. So there is no God who is permanent. There is no I with an eternal, immortal soul. Right? Nothing is permanent. Everything changes. And that's where our fundamental flaw, comes into play. What do we want? What do we want? The Buddha would say, what do we want in life when you boil it all down? We want something that lasts. It's the changes of life. You know, it's this need that kind of hurts this morning. That didn't happen before. It's, where did all that go? You know, we desire things to stay the same. But they don't. Everything changes. And so the Buddha will say, we will be happy, we will be liberated when we embrace that truth and stop desiring things we can't have. There's something to that, isn't there? That's not totally off the rails.
Yes, it is. How can you say that if I bumped into a Buddhist and I said to him, well, what do you believe? And he'd say, well, from what you're telling us here right now, is he don't believe in anything. Nothing is here for permanency. Everything's going to change.
That's what they believe.
Well, but if that's true,
You're believing in negative, right? Nothing is permanent.
so what is there to believe in?
Everything.
Yeah. Okay, so what do you believe in? What they will say to believe in is believe in this moment. Be happy with what I am now and what this moment is. And when I do that, the Buddha will say we should love others. That when we're freed from desire, then we can truly be loving to other people.
Even be happy to feed mosquitoes.
Yeah, so it's different, but I think there's an element of truth to it. So, all right, so the Buddha will say that there's really, he breaks it down. There are the one error that he talks about, desire, really is three errors. There's three things that we want that we can't have. The first one is called no self, anatta. Isn't that there? Mm-hmm. Anatta. So what he's saying is there is no immortal soul within us. As the Hindus said, no Atman. There is no universal soul. Okay? So the essence of me is that there is no essence. Here I am, and as long as I understand that I'm here now and I will pass out of existence as I can be happy. So there is no immortal soul. Second error, impermanence, anicca. Nothing is permanent, not even the self. Nothing is permanent. That really flies in the face of our Christian upbringing, where, we desire eternal life. We want eternal life, right? The Buddha would say, nah, sorry. And then third is suffering or desire. And suffering or desire, dukkha, is the result of the first two errors, anatta and anicca. So, that led the Buddha to formulate what is called the Four Truths, the Four Noble Truths. First noble truth, this, O bhikkhus, bhikkhus is one of the monks that he's speaking to, is the noble truth of suffering. Birth is suffering. Decay is suffering. Illness is suffering. Death is suffering. Presence of objects we hate is suffering. Separation from objects we love is suffering. Not to obtain what we desire is suffering. Briefly, the fivefold clinging to existence is suffering. That's the first noble truth. This, O bhikkhus, is the noble truth of the cause of suffering. Thirst that leads to rebirth, accompanied by pleasure and lust, finding its delight here and there. This thirst is threefold, namely, thirst for pleasure, thirst for existence, thirst for prosperity. Third noble truth. This, O bhikkhus, is the noble truth of the cessation of suffering. It ceases with the complete cessation of this thirst. A cessation which consists in the absence of every passion, with the abandoning of this thirst, with the doing away with it, with the deliverance from it, with the destruction of desire. This, O bhikkhus, is the noble truth of the path which leads to the cessation of suffering. That holy eightfold path, that is to say, right belief, right aspiration, right speech, right conduct, right means of livelihood, right endeavor, right mindfulness, right meditation. So the way out of the trap of suffering and desire is to follow this eightfold path. Okay? So what are those attachments that we need to give up? It's not that, I will say that we have to give up family attachments. That doesn't mean give them up completely. It means understand them correctly. So, the love of houses and land, love of parents, spouses, children, or friends. If we look upon those and desire them forever, if we desire them never to change or go away, we will suffer. He's not saying don't love your parents, don't love your spouse, don't love your kids. He's saying love them correctly. Love them knowing that eventually I will go away and they will go away. Once I get that this is temporary, I can love them correctly and love them the way I ought. It's different, I know. We should avoid excessive concern about ourselves because this causes suffering. We should even avoid desire or attachment to the Buddha himself. If we desire enlightenment too much, we will not have it. So he says too, we should avoid greed, hatred, and ignorance. Good. The pleasures of the senses, ill will, sloth, restlessness, and doubt. Also, belief in the existence of the self. Doubt. Trust in rituals and ceremonies. Lust, anger, desire for rebirth, pride, self-righteousness, and ignorance. We should give those things up. If we can do that, then we will have that proper state of mind. We will have that consciousness, that pure consciousness, that peace, if you want to use that word, that peace, which will bring us salvation, which will bring us happiness, which will, in the Buddhist scheme of things, be salvation. It will be the experience of salvation. And at the end, and we will experience nirvana already on earth. So then what is nirvana? Nirvana is that state of existence and non-existence. Okay? So really, when you get right down to it, the Buddha will say that once this life is over, we are extinct. There is no more I. Okay? So that's really different than our Christian way of thinking.
So the only punishment for not being a good Buddhist is that you don't get nirvana. And a lot of this stuff that they're preaching are pretty pleasurable things. You know, it says don't be greedy. Well, what if I want a lot of money? And in my mind, I would say, yeah, okay, I'm just going to die and be reincarnated in a new form anyway. So why not? Why do I got to follow this?
Well, yeah. Well, you know, if someone wins the lottery, so the Buddhist who is saved looks at it and says, "Well, that's cool," you know, but doesn't say, "Oh, good, now I've got it made." You know, it just popped into my mind that parable of Jesus about the man who built, you know, extra barns to store his grain. And you know, and he said, "Good, now I got it. Now I'm secured for the future." And God said, "I don't think so. Your life will be required of you this night." I think there's a parallel there. So it's not so much what we have; it's our attitude toward what we have. The Buddha will say we are more free, we are happier, we love better, we love more expansively when we understand that all of this is passing. In other words, there is an urgency to it. Why should I dislike someone? Why should I be prejudiced towards someone? Why should I hate someone? It doesn't make any sense. If I am liberated, then I am free to love all things. Knowing, because I know that none of this is permanent. I think that's kind of at the heart of it. That's the way I get it.
But if you desire something, it causes suffering.
Yes.
So if I desire to have a wonderful meal, I'm going to suffer for that.
If you desire it wrongly, see, that's the thing. The Buddhists would say, of course, enjoy that meal, knowing that the enjoyment that you have is in this moment. Enjoy it in this moment. What I think the contribution of Buddhism, and in particular Zen, and I hope to be able to get that far, is that the Buddhist, and in particular the Zen Buddhist, is able to experience the fullness of life because they experience it in this moment. The Zen person would say, you know, I'm here and I'm fully engaged in this moment. I'm not thinking about what I got to do next week and what's the next and what about this and what about that. The Zen person is free because the Zen practitioner can live fully in this moment. Why? Because that person understands that this moment You ready? Here it comes. All right. Here comes a moment. 1, 2, 3. It's already gone. So if I wasted it by desiring something else, then I've missed what this moment is. And if I've missed this moment, in effect, the Zen Buddhist will say, I don't get anything. I've missed it all. So that's why they have these silly little koans, these silly little sayings about, Master, what do I need to do to experience liberation or happiness? What you need to do is swallow all the water in the Mississippi River in one gulp. Thank you. But then, once the student understands what that means, then they get it. And it's not a process of logical reasoning, it's a flash of insight. Okay? You can't reason your way to moksha or liberation. You can't reason your way to it. It's a flash, it's an understanding, it's an aha, just like Brahmanist Hinduism. It's an aha that says, oh, now I get it. I am free, I am liberated from the suffering of desire because I understand impermanence. I understand that whatever is in this moment, whatever it is passing away. It is now, but it is passing away. You all won't be here in an hour. So, as much as needed as this experience is for me in this moment, if I live for this moment and desire it wrongly, I will suffer. If I experience it in its fullness right now, and then let it go when it's over, and experience the next thing in its fullness, then I am free. Then I am truly happy. Does that make sense? So, anyway.
I don't think I want him in charge of the city.
May not be such a good thing, yeah. There's a pothole. Don't worry, it's going to pass away. Forget about it.
They make better citizens than officials.
Yeah, exactly. All right, so now let's talk about the evolution. Because we'll see that this is the insight of the Buddha. It changed. Remember I talked about those 4 stages. There's the background, there's the founder or founding event, then there's the disciples, and then there is kind of the evolution. When it's like the Mississippi Delta, you know. The Mississippi is this stream, and all of a sudden it's 100 different streams. Same thing happened with Buddhism. So in the beginning, Buddhism didn't make any inroads into India at all. And what happened instead, and this is something the Buddha would never have wanted, he became a god. Okay? So they took this man and divinized him. They made this human being and made him into a god. Okay? And they surrounded him, they surrounded the Buddha, the god Buddha, with other divinities, other Bodhis, other Buddhas. And their purpose was to help people here on earth find salvation. So already it's changing, right? The Buddha had said self-salvation. Now we have the followers saying, oh no, you can get help. There's these, let's call them the saints, if you want to do that. Let's call them the saints who can help you. Sound a little bit familiar? Okay. So, in its original form, Buddhism was way too complex for common people to either have the time or the interest to pursue. So, they put magic and ritual and myth into it. Okay? They took practices that carried over from their pre-Buddhist days to make it more doable, more believable. Okay. So, Buddhism... the only place that it really thrived was in the region around the Ganges River. Until there was this emperor of India whose name is Asoka, A-S-O-K-A. And he made Buddhism into a missionary religion. He promoted Buddhism all throughout India. Asoka, the Emperor Asoka, actually envisioned Buddhism as a world religion. So he sent missionaries to Southeast Asia and later on into China. And they actually, I did not know this, they actually proselytized as far away as Syria, Egypt, Cyrene, and Greece. So, yeah, so Buddhism spread all the way into the Middle East and into Europe.
What year?
We are, Asoka is like the 3rd century before Christ. So what an interesting thought that some have said that Jesus was in contact with Buddha's thought. I don't think so, but
What was the original Buddha? Was he preaching? Trying to convert people?
he did. He did. He was a teacher. He went, but he stayed in India. It was this guy, Asoka, who really made Buddhism into a world religion, a missionary religion, where Hinduism never was. All right, so I mentioned evolution. So there evolved 2 main ways to be a Buddhist. The Theravada and the Mahayana. The lesser vehicle and the greater vehicle. Okay, Theravada. Theravada is the Buddhism of the monks. Okay, it is that brand of Buddhism which was espoused by the Buddha himself. It is the minority path. It is the path that's followed less often. Okay, so the Theravada monk believes that the Buddha is gone. The Buddha has experienced nirvana and is at peace and is no longer active in the world. So it focuses on meditation and devotion, and there is a belief, as the Buddha had said, there's a belief in previous appearances of the Buddha. Not the same person, but those who are Bodhis, those who are enlightened ones. And the last of these is a guy named Maitreya, who will come and enlighten the world once again, so that there would be another Buddha who would come later on. Okay? That's Theravada, also called Hinayana. The other school or way of practicing Buddhism is called Mahayana. Mahayana started in northwest India, and it was also helped. Its spread was helped by Syrians, Greeks, and Scythians. So, where in the heck is Scythia? Well, Scythia is that region in Central Asia, north of Iraq and Iran. So there were Buddhists there. The mixture of these is pretty amazing, isn't it? Okay, so Mahayana focuses more on lay people, not the monk. So, in Mahayana, Siddhartha Gautama, the Buddha, came to be adored or worshipped as a god who came to earth. So an eternal God who came to earth out of compassion for suffering humanity. It sounds a little bit familiar, right? The Buddha came to earth out of compassion for suffering humanity. Before he came to earth, he had a different title. He was a Bodhisattva. That term is there, Bodhisattva, which is a future Buddha. Okay? So then, there have been a series of many Buddhas. And in the future, there will be many more Buddhas. And there will be many Bodhisattvas, future Buddhas. All right? And what is their purpose? The Buddhas and the Bodhisattvas are here to help us find liberation, help us experience liberation. So no longer do we have this system of self-salvation. We have a system of help. Okay? So that's a huge difference. So somebody can help you find liberation. So in Mahayana, compassion, because, I may want to help somebody, experience liberation. Compassion is more important than self-salvation. There is even this thing called the Bodhisattva vow, that any person, if I were magnanimous enough, I can transfer my karma to someone else who might need it. No one, present company excluded, but I can transfer my good karma to someone else who I think is, might need my help. Okay, which is very nice. So the Mahayana Buddhism was much more accessible and much more appealing, and it helped Buddhism to spread really all throughout Asia. So where did it go? It went to China, as we know, in the 3rd century before Christ. It did not really take hold in China until between the 3rd and 6th centuries after Christ. So the religions that it is, Chinese Buddhism is commingled with 2 other religions, native religions of China, Taoism and Confucianism. Okay? So Buddhism, Taoism, and Confucianism all kind of intermingle in China. It spread to Korea, so there's Korean Buddhism, which is different again. It went to Japan. It went to Tibet and Mongolia. And in a minute, I'll talk a little more at length about Tibetan Buddhism. Buddhism flourished in India until about the 7th century after Christ. For about 600 years after Christ. And one of the things that did it in was the rise of Islam, which happened in the 7th century. Islam, as we'll see in a few weeks, spread, it was also a missionary religion, and it spread very rapidly, and it spread into India. And as we know from history, Islam spread as far as Indonesia. Its breadth was very wide. So anyway, all right. So far so good.
Now, Tibet, it seems like from remembering what little memory I have left, Tibet was, you went to Tibet and you spoke to the Holy Lama.
The Dalai Lama.
Which is different than Buddhism.
It's a different kind of Buddhism.
Okay.
The Dalai Lama, who is not in Tibet, the Dalai Lama lives in India. The Dalai Lama is the spiritual leader in Tibetan Buddhism. And he is an enlightened one. And and whoever takes his place is the reincarnation of the previous one.
Okay, well, I remember Indiana Jones.
The Brad Pitt movie, 7 Years in Tibet? That was, yeah.
Going up to the top of the mountain, and the guy sitting there on the peak of the mountain, and they're going there for liberation or enlightenment and all that.
Yep.
So, one of the things that you were going by this, that you mentioned much earlier, that they have women Buddhists.
Yes.
But never have you seen an image of a Buddha being a woman.
No. I mean, I'm not sure if that's true.
I've never seen it.
At the art museum, they have a Buddha there that is androgynous, that is fabulous, so go see it.
Yeah.
There we go.
Okay.
There it is. Yeah.
If you take Buddhism in Thailand and you take Buddhism in where the Dalai Lama is, they're nowhere near the same animals.
No.
And so you can't do what we just did.
No.
You can't do that.
No, there is no broad brush. There is no one brushstroke that covers everything. It's the same with Christianity. Catholicism is nowhere even close to Seventh-day Adventist. Once you get past Jesus, in those religions, it's pretty much, be good and do good and avoid evil. After that, it's a very different thing.
The other part that's going on right now is there's a lot of persecution in and around Buddhism around the world right now, heavily in northwestern China, and well, and in the Muslims too. So what they are experiencing today is like a deportation,
Yeah.
much like the Jews experienced.
Yeah, I mean, there is that seems to be happening in a number of places. Christians are persecuted in certain parts of the world. Muslims are being persecuted. Buddhists are being persecuted. We just are going through a phase of history right now. I mean, it's probably happened all through, but there seems to be a spike. Jews are being persecuted in different parts of the world. This just seems to be one of those moments in history. Yeah.
One thing that's happening is that China has been taken over by very ambitious and very driven people.
Yes.
And they have no use for people who are accepting of anything and have no competitive drive. And I'm thinking that Buddhism does not lend itself to competitive drive.
Well, you put you combine Buddhism, especially with Confucianism in China. Confucianism is very much about everyone understanding their role in society. It's similar, but not the same as the caste system. According to Confucianist theology, there is order and peace in the world. Everything functions in conjunction with the Tao when everyone understands their role in society and plays it out. So in other words, don't try to be more or less than what you are. Play out your own role. Sounds a little bit like the caste system, but it's not quite as rigid.
But we haven't heard that word
Confucianism. Yeah, we don't have time to.
That for quite a while.
Right. Yeah, I mean, the Chinese Communist Party they use Confucianism to their advantage. When there is peace in China, they squelch Confucianism, like during the Tiananmen uprising in the 1989 and all that. They will then trot out Confucian principles about keeping order and peace. So they use Confucianism when it suits them.
Like Hong Kong today.
Yeah. All right. So I have a few other things to say about Zen Buddhism. I want to, in the time remaining, say a few words about Zen and then a few words about Tibetan Buddhism, which are two of the different kinds. And I should mention, I didn't pass these around, but I have all kinds of stuff here. One of the best authors in English about Buddhism, I think, is a gentleman named D.T. Suzuki. And I have 3 of his books here. Another one is Thich Nhat Hanh. I also have a book of, this is more Japanese, but haiku poetry. Okay? And so, come on up and take a look.
Did Suzuki write the art of Zen and motorcycle maintenance?
Motorcycle.
No, that was Kawasaki. Thank you very much. Thank you. Or was it Harley? I don't know. Anyway, Zen. So the goal of Zen is immediate enlightenment. Enlightenment through a flash of insight, just like the Buddha. But Zen practitioners will say that research and books and lectures and good works and rituals are, not only are they useless, but they are a hindrance to enlightenment. So if you want to become a Zen practitioner, stop coming to this. I shouldn't say that. So there are 4 primary principles to it. First, there is in Zen a relationship, a special relationship between a student and a master. Okay? And this is probably the hardest one for us Westerners to grasp. It eschews, it rejects reliance on reasoning, or logic or analysis or explanation. We love when before we experience something, we want to analyze the hell out of it, right? We want to know exactly what we're talking about. That's what I do. I would be a terrible Zen student. They believe in direct pointing to the soul of humanity. Direct pointing. And that only happens through experience. And fourth, the way we understand or experience Buddhahood, the way we become an arahat, a saint, or a bodhi, an enlightened one, is by understanding our true nature. So what is our true nature? Our true nature, to go back to something I've already said, our true nature is that we are impermanent. Okay? Our true nature, and that's what we have to understand, is that we are not permanent. That absolutely refutes, denies what we believe as Christians. Okay? And so, Zen teaches its practitioners to experience things and to experience life from moment to moment. To live fully and experience fully this moment. Why? Because if we don't, it's over. We missed it. If you missed that moment 2 minutes and 13 seconds ago, it's too late. You can't have it back. Time is not a renewable resource. And so, when we experience life, and what makes us happy, liberated when we experience life, is that we understand that this moment and this group of people and this self doing the experiencing are all impermanent, passing away. We are here and passing away at the same time. Once I get that, once I understand that fundamental reality, then I can be happy. Because then I don't falsely desire this moment. Think of that, the moment of that great meal, right? The Zen practitioner would say, live that meal to the fullness. Enjoy the heck out of it. But when it's over, it's over. It's in the past.
So much for memories.
Not so much. That's right. Yeah, it is about living in this moment. It's not about denying the past. It's not about denying the past at all. It's just about experiencing fullness in this moment. So maybe in this moment I am experiencing my memories. Okay? I think about all the, I think about the many, many happy memories I had with my wife when she was alive. That's not an improper desire. That's not an improper desire. What's an improper desire is to believe that somehow by having the memory of her, I can bring her back. That I can't do. Okay? That is impermanent. So to experience enlightenment means a couple of things. We have to overcome, and here comes that word again, we have to overcome our dualistic thinking. That there is the world and me. There is that same kind of thing that all is one. Everything is one, and what makes everything one is that it is passing away. All that there is a series of a flow of things coming into existence and then passing out of existence. That is reality. When we grasp that truth, we are happy. And as I've already kind of said this, but to experience enlightenment, we have to stop distinguishing, separating, defining, analyzing, describing, asking questions. Why? Because all of these things separate us from the thing we're trying to understand. Experience it. Don't analyze it. Don't describe it, experience it. So when you read haiku poetry, what is it? It's the silliest little things. 7 in the morning, the bird is chirping, the water drips from the faucet. Wow. But if I am living in the moment, if I understand the bird chirping, the water dripping from the fountain, the faucet, if I understand that moment, and that's what haiku does, if I understand that and its impermanence, then I understand everything. To understand one thing, according to Zen, is to understand the nature of everything. I don't know if it makes sense or not, but that's, I'm not sure it makes sense to me. But, okay. And then there is, well, no. I suggest that when you have a moment that you Google the term Zen koan, K-O-A-N. The koan is that, that question like, go swallow all the water of the Yalu River, the Yellow River in one gulp, then come back. And then the person does come back and say, oh yeah, I have swallowed all the water in the Yalu River. Good, then you are enlightened. Tibetan Buddhism in 30 words or less. Okay, so one of the things that makes it different is that there's a lot of devotionalism, there's a lot of veneration of gods and goddesses, and a lot of magic, okay? There are both female and male Buddhist deities. All right? Tibetan Buddhism is very big into demonophobia. In other words, the Tibetans believe that there are like demons hiding behind every rock and every corner. Think about the terrain of Tibet. There's 100 different ways that a rock or the wind or the snow or the whatever can get you on any given day. So they perceive all of that as somehow there are demons out there that are going to get you. So what do? You appease the demons. You have your prayer wheel or your prayer bowl. So you do that to ward off all of these evil gods that are lurking everywhere. Okay? So demonophobia and fighting demonophobia is an important part of Tibetan Buddhism. It also believes that passion can be overcome by the exercise of passion. So we can learn how to eat correctly to overcome the craving for eating. Not starvation, but eating properly. We can have sex to overcome the craving of sex. That one's a little tougher than the eating thing. But, all right, so, there are a number of religious practices, fasting and prayer, mantras, these mystical, symbols, Om, and, that's part of Tibetan Buddhism. The positioning of one's hands, prayer wheels, and priests. There are Tibetan Buddhist priests who perform rituals to exorcise demons. The Korean Buddhists have that too, and I'm reminded of an episode of my favorite TV show of all time, MASH, where before the guy could perform, before Hawkeye could perform an operation, the Buddhist priest had to come in and perform an exorcism. That too is part of Tibetan Buddhism. The Dalai Lama is the spiritual leader of Tibetan Buddhism. He is currently in exile. He was kicked out of Tibet by the Chinese. But he is...
He fled.
He fled.
He fled.
He fled.
No, that's a big
That's a big
difference.
difference when you talk to him.
I thought he knew that he got out of town before they were going to kick him out.
That might be
That
true.
might be true.
However, the
If you're in
choice
Tibet,
to
they'll
leave
say
Was his.
he fled.
No, That's an
No.
extremely difficult decision.
Yeah.
Because in essence,
Uh-huh.
he is a deity in Tibet.
Yes.
And if he moves him,
Yeah.
he moves their positive powers with him.
Yeah.
They don't stay there.
Kind of sounds like Yahweh in Babylon, doesn't
Thank
it? Yeah.
So when he made the decision to move, he knew
Yeah. What he was doing.
he himself was abandoning his people.
Yeah.
I've talked to him personally, okay?
Yeah.
Wow.
He's a wonderful man.
He's
Okay.
a truly wonderful man.
Yeah, yeah.
But he grieves that leaving.
Yeah, they had to leave, yeah.
It took him, he waited way too long to leave.
Okay.
Even. So the thing they're trying not to have happen, in China, there is a replacement Buddha being groomed. They wanted him to go to China and bless this person as his replacement.
Oh,
That's what led to the fleet.
yeah,
As long as he didn't do that,
yeah,
then the people wouldn't believe that this new one
Other guy.
is his reincarnation.
yeah, yeah.
So the purpose of his leaving was to keep the Chinese
Sure.
from having that Chinaman become the leader and then refocus from Tibet to China.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. A lot of good information. So there you have it. So any last comments, questions?
Why do they call it red Buddhism?
Because of they wear the color.
Oh, the color.
Yeah. So next week we'll start looking at one of the religions of the Middle East. We'll be looking at Zoroastrianism. Okay? And I thank you once again for coming.